It's official! Well, almost. This time on Poll Hub, the biggest mayoral race in America appears to be over. Eric Adams looks to be the Democratic nominee, and due to the very blue nature of New York City politics, he's got a pretty strong chance of being the next mayor come January 1st. But what about the rocky process that got us here? Remember that ranked choice voting? And what does Adams' victory on pro-police and a pro-police reform platform mean for Democrats nationally? There is a lot to dissect here, and we're going to do that. Then July 4th has come and gone, and Joe Biden's 70% vaccinated goal? Well, we missed that. At this point, it looks very much like those who want to get a COVID vaccine have, and nothing is going to convince the rest of us to join them. Who's in which group? Which states are doing better and why? We'll discuss. Finally, Lee's fun fact takes us back to the late 90s for a culture war clash. That sounds fun, right? We have a packed episode full of geeky goodness, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
So as we record this episode on Wednesday, July 7th, it looks like the mayor's race in New York City, at least the Democratic part of it, is over. The second place finisher, Catherine Garcia, just announced that she was not going to challenge the results. She conceded, and Eric Adams looks to be the Democratic nominee. And as we noted, in New York City, the Democratic nominee generally, although certainly not always, generally in a field with weak Republicans, is going to win the race. So there's two things we want to talk about here. One is this crazy process that got us here. And I think if we can loop back to that, what that might mean for voters' faith in elections and all of that. But can we talk first about what this might mean for Democrats? Because a lot of DC Democrats, a lot of the political in-crowd are talking about how Eric Adams running on this anti-crime, addressing crime with policing, and at the same time a pro-police reform platform seems to have won over a constituency. And that might apply nationally. Do we think that DC is just ahead of the game on this if Politico's down there, or does that ring true?
I don't think it's going to cause a great hesitance on the part of Republicans nationally in the midterm elections to call the Democrats, the no anti-crime party or whatever, soft on police.
Defund the police.
Defund
the police party.
I mean, I don't think, New York City is seen as a different ballgame. And although your point is well taken that the most pro-cop candidate won because he is a former policeman, that may not, dampen the spirits of Republicans in Washington as they run for the midterms around the nation. In fact, they may just ignore it entirely. Had it come out differently, Maya Wiley, had she run, and she was probably the one who had articulated the defund the police, although she said that's not exactly what she meant, that would have then become a target.
She was also endorsed by AOC and Elizabeth Warren and that progressive part of the Democratic Party.
So the so-called socialists would have now been taking over the Democratic Party, and that would have been a bigger target. So right now, I think this was an interesting result for a variety of reasons. But I don't think it's going to change the strategies of the national parties going into the midterm elections.
But Barb, the Republicans may keep running on defund the police, but isn't this a roadmap?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to point out too. I think this can encourage a number of Democrats, because here you have New York City, which is the home of AOC and a lot of progressive Democrats, and you have this combination of a candidate who was actually espousing both positions. In other words, that you can have police reform and you can have good policing. So I think this actually does, in a sense, provide a roadmap and encourages other Democrats around the country to be able to think about balancing this debate, rather than just making it, a very binary choice, whether you have to either defund the police or you're for social justice. I'm reminded of the arguments of, back a couple of decades of you had to choose between the environment or the economy. And, you couldn't have economic growth and protect the environment as well. And well, people didn't really agree with that, but there was a debate, and our political debate focused on that you had to make that choice. And I think over time we found that, well, you can do actually both. And that is, I think, what Eric Adams represents for Democrats. In terms of at least messaging, we'll have to see about actually governing. But in terms of messaging, I think it is a pretty significant, idea for the Democrats, particularly going into 2022, in a time where we are seeing, rise in, particularly violent crime.
So we'll see what happens and how that plays out. Let's turn to the other big kind of thing here, which is there's been this increasing distrust of elections. A lot of that was clearly spawned by Donald Trump pushing the fake, the lie that the election was, that he was actually elected president, and that the election had all these problems. But then this ranked choice voting situation with the New York City Board of Elections kind of reinforces the idea that elections aren't so well run after all. Is that a lasting
Well, wait a
problem
second.
here?
Wait a second. You can't use the New York City Board of Elections as a baseline for whether a system works or
Very
not.
true. Very true.
Nothing really adds up to 100% at the Board of Elections in New York City.
But at the same time, does the news around this, the confusion, they released a set of results and then pulled them back because they had votes that had been counted that had been test votes? I mean, you couldn't write a better script if you're trying to sow more distrust, right? I mean, or am I overplaying it?
Well, I think that you're not overplaying it, but I think that the ranked choice voting movement is here to stay. I think this would have been a colossal failure had there been massive confusion about who you could vote for and how many people you could vote for. I think people, as we saw in our poll, those who wanted to participate had a pretty good understanding of what the process was. And I thought it was interesting, even with the absentee ballots, which of course are becoming a more popular way of people voting, particularly during the pandemic, did not alter the outcome in terms of who was ahead. In fact, and I think we've talked about this in previous podcasts, the person who's been ahead at the end of the first round, with all but one or two exceptions, has ended up winning. So Adams was ahead in the first round. There was some jockeying for position over who was going to be second, and then end up in the final elimination tournament, as it was. But that was... Adams ended up eking it out, and I think it all played out pretty true to form. People thought it was going to get closer, but that Adams had perhaps put together too big a lead in the early round, so that the Garcia, everybody's second choice was not enough to alter the overall outcome. I suspect there'd be more grumbling right now had Adams lost, particularly in the Black community. Concern about whether, in fact, there was a anti-Black component to this, or at least that might have been the spin coming off. But everything played out true to form. And I just thought it was interesting. Our polling was interesting. I think the number of so-called exhausted ballots, which I think was around 15% of the people who didn't have either Adams or Garcia in their count at the end, spoke to the fact that people sort of found the candidate they liked and they rank ordered them. And, I think ranked choice voting lives to be another day with more elections.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree there too, because, except for, as you point out, the huge Board of Elections flub, everything actually progressed, to kind of script. There is a great probability that the person who wins the first choice vote does go on to win. I think people, as Lee pointed out, people understood how to do this in New York City. And until the Board of Elections realized they had all these test ballots that had been counted, everything was really progressing pretty well. And the polls also had a good run on this election.
Yeah,
too.
what did we just real briefly before I move in, Barb? What did we learn? We had never done a ranked choice voting poll. We were really the only. A lot of people said the only quality poll that actually polled this race, and so got a lot of attention for that. What did we learn as pollsters?
A lot. I mean, I think on the face of it, just like it seems complicated to go and vote, it seemed complicated to be able to poll this. But in the end of the day, it wasn't. It was a pretty clear process. As I've mentioned before in a previous podcast, we partnered with Fair Vote, who didn't have a candidate in the race, but they are an advocacy group for ranked choice voting. And they helped guide us in terms of how to automate the ranked choice process once the data was collected, and our combination of our expertise in surveys and how to ask the questions and their expertise in how to develop algorithms to count the votes speedily was a good match. And I think overall, it showed that both polling and voters could handle this. And there's no runoff. We don't have to go through this again. One day, one election, and then the ranked choice vote takes care of that.
Yeah, and in effect, that becomes the runoff as we go from round to round to round.
Exactly.
Eliminating. I found something very interesting in the polling, and just to wrap with this point, is that we deal with margins of error and all that, but one of the things I found really interesting was, of the 13 candidates, they were kind of ended up sort of where the poll had them. I guess in a racetrack, it's a quinella when you pick the first 5. I don't know if there is a 13 betting equivalent of that, but I found very interesting that the people who we thought were going to get around 1% got around 1%. The next group we thought were going to be around 3% got around 3%. We did realize from the timing of our poll to the primary day itself that the Yang campaigning with Garcia was going to boost her, and it did ultimately when the final vote was closer in the last round than we might have anticipated. But the candidates all came into order the way we. So I think it'd be interesting to see whether this makes for a more informed electorate, and that makes for even better polling down the road. That's something we're going to have to see as we do other ranked choice voting examples. So I thought it was all very interesting, and I hope the people of New York found it that way too, because I found it that way, and I think there was a lot to be learned all around.
So there was another goal that had been set for July 4th by President Joe Biden. He had been very optimistic to have 70% of US adults receive at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. He and his administration and the country fell short of that goal. I believe at this point, 67% of Americans have had at least one shot. I believe we're moving to, in many places, allow Americans who are 12 or older to be included as being able to be vaccinated. So that proportion will drop to 64%. But what does that mean going forward for COVID in this country?
Well, the number that comes out of this the most is we're down to 300,000 vaccinations going into arms a day now. I mean, in a country of 300 million people, 300,000, we're down to 300,000. The people who are going to get vaccinated have gotten vaccinated, and sadly it's more than 30%. It looks like of Americans aren't going to get vaccinated, and I mean the plans that people have. the Biden administration going locally and trying to make it very focused on local events and local people talking to one another and all that. That sounds great. How that scales to the point where you get to 75 or 80%, when a lot of virologists say you've got to get there if we're going to stop variants from continuing to pop up and be troublesome. I guess I just don't see how you get there. Based on what we're seeing in various states where there
but some
is
states have done better than others.
but they tend to be states that are, more alike. They're in the Northeast, for instance. They have a higher educational attainment. They have a higher social cohesion than states, for instance, in the Deep South, where and it's not even racial, right? I mean, in the Deep South, there's a lot of blacks that aren't getting the vaccine for other reasons.
Given and I think you make a very good point that given how successful these vaccines have been, unusually successful, such that just a smidgen of the people who are getting sick and getting hospitalized or dying are the people who were vaccinated. I mean, there's no evidence of any significant side effects. There is huge evidence that this is the reason why we've been able to open up things and had successes, is because so many people are vaccinated. And the concern, as you say, is with the variants as they emerge one by one. We're not going to put that fire out until the world really is more vaccinated. But certainly, the protection individuals can have right now is right there down their neighborhood street to get themselves covered for this. Minimally, wearing a mask obviously had a big impact. That wasn't a great intrusion into people's lives. And a shot seems to work also. I would want to say one thing about Joe Biden. And, I know he came up a little bit short in terms of this. I don't see it as a defeat given where we came from. I see it sort of like he didn't cover the point spread. I think he won. He just didn't get to the 70. So I'll take the 67 or the 64 if you include 12 to 18-year-olds as a victory for the public health community and for the opportunity for the people saw most of the country to go this way. The trouble is, and I know you've said this to people both privately and on the podcast, this is a social commitment people have to make. It's a community commitment, because if I'm not vaccinated, I'm not just endangering myself. And that is where the cohesion you talked about, Jay, really is important. That if we're going to have a unified attack on this, then people have to have that sense of community, because we're all in this together ultimately. And to me, that's the big disappointing thing. The evidence is there, the values should be there, and that people are endangering not only themselves, but the desire to really extinguish this flame is there. And we run the risk of these new variants, and maybe we're going to pop a variant that the vaccines aren't as strong against.
But hang on just a second. But polling has shown that there's actually a lot of different reasons why people choose not to be vaccinated. And Jay, you pointed out this is not a racial division in this country. I mean, there are different reasons why people are not getting vaccinated, from some of the political reasons which drive the debate, but also there's fear, there's concern, there's lack of knowledge, there's lack of trust. I mean, we are in a period of time where there is a significant lack of trust, something that we have documented, we have polled, and we have discussed on this podcast. And this is certainly playing into this issue as well. But you do have states, that have taken a very local perspective on this and have worked in communities, worked in specific cities and communities. Massachusetts is a case in point, where 82% of adults there are vaccinated. Is there a path to greater vaccination, even though it is slowed. I mean, 300,000 is not, a huge number of people. It is still, it is still moving in that direction.
I mean, the thing I think that maybe there is a way, but one of the things that strikes me is that if you look at what's happened in Israel, for instance, this is a country that had the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine vaccinated a majority of its population very quickly, and is widely, seen as one of the, if not the most successful, countries in terms of getting people vaccinated and controlling COVID. And yet the Delta variant has come in, and they've gone back into lockdowns, and people there, even though there's a very small percentage of unvaccinated, the last report I read, which was yesterday, was 25% of the people who are in the hospital in Israel have had both vaccines of the Pfizer vaccine. So, if that, in a country like that, if that can happen there, and that news is out there, if that doesn't spark us to increase our vaccination rates, I don't know what will. And I think it does have the unintended effect of people going, look, if Israel can't do it with all of that, then why should I bother going and getting the vaccine? Because if I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it. And you do hear that. You see that anecdotally. I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it. Not that many people die. It's like the flu. It's like riding in a car, whatever. I don't know how you beat that.
Well, we've learned that isn't the case.
Yeah, and I hope we don't go back down that road. It's going to be very tough to put the glue back in the tube if we have to go start closing up again. And hopefully we don't have to go that route. Well, the fun fact today is also controversial.
Boy, actually, it's a tough segue. But,
but that's what makes public opinion, I guess. If everybody had the same view, we wouldn't have much to measure. So, here we go. So 1999, Roper Center, we were able to locate that. The Brooklyn Museum of Art had put on a display which had some sexual sensation exhibition, some people found gruesome and too graphic. And the question became a national...
And significant religious overtones.
Yes, and it became much more of a national issue about what museums have a right to do. If do they have a right to put anything in the name of art? Or what if this is offensive to people? And the majority of Americans in 1999 found that they agreed with the museum, but the strongly agree and the strongly disagree, those extremes we see everywhere, the polarization was there on this question also. About a third each felt that they either strongly agreed or strongly disagreed. So the question this raises is, are we allowing what some people to think is offensive material, where others say art? Where do we draw the line, and do we need to draw a line? And what if it is offensive? Where do you guys jump in on this?
I mean, art is certainly a fluid subject, and it's always described as in the eye of the beholder. But I'm also thinking of, the Supreme Court definition, of pornography. You kind of know it when you see it. So it's a really tough issue, because I think on the one hand, there's certainly a consensus that museums do have a right to exhibit art the way that they see fit, particularly in private museums who are responsible more to the people who support them financially than they are to the broader public. But I think that we've also seen that we should acknowledge those who are offended by such art, by such promotion of what we see as value and important in society. And I think as we've looked at some of the things that we as a country, as communities, and as cities and towns, we know that what we promote, what we show to be held up as valuable is important and has an impact on people beyond just the art.
Is it enough to just say people who don't like it just should choose not to go? Is that adequate? Jay, solve this discussion.
Yeah. So look, first, I'm a journalist, so I'm a journalist, First Amendment absolutist. They've got every right to do that. Remember, though, that this question didn't actually really ask the question that was at issue. Giuliani wanted to evict the Brooklyn Museum from the Brooklyn Museum because of this. So, as he famously said, if somebody wants to throw dung at the Virgin Mary, they can do that. That's their First Amendment right. I don't do a good Giuliani.
That wasn't
impression.
too bad.
But the public shouldn't have to pay for it. The public shouldn't have to pay for it. Anyway, and that was his position. And that was actually a fairly popular position in the city. But, the First Amendment wins in this poll, and I'm all for that.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm Mary Griffith, and Poll Hub's executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor. Ashley Marcinek is our production assistant, and Marcello Bettman is our trusted editor. Thanks to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University. They provide us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades. If you have questions or comments, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. And while you're at it, check out our free series of short online learning modules. The Marist Poll Academy can be found on maristpoll.com. Finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review on your podcasting app of choice. Positive reviews help others find us. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you back here next week.